felt a shiver run down her spine as she lay in bed, her body aching, her head spinning with fever. Her wounds, though treated, were still inflamed and painful. The heat from the fever made everything feel unreal, like she was drifting in and out of a fog. But then, something jolted her back to reality. Something was wrong. She glanced over at the box where Tuchka had been resting. It was empty. Her heart skipped a beat. "Tuchka," she called softly, but there was no answer. Panic surged through her, and she pushed herself up, wincing at the pain. "Tuchka? Where are you?" 1. The lost kitten in trouble. The day had started like any other. The air was crisp with the lingering scent of autumn leaves, and the gentle breeze carried the sound of rustling branches. 12-year-old Anna walked along the familiar path behind her house, her sneakers crunching against the gravel. She loved this time of day, the quiet moments when she could let her thoughts wander. She wasn't looking for anything unusual, just enjoying the solitude. But then, a faint, sharp cry cut through the air. Anna stopped mid-step, her heart skipping a beat. A second cry followed, high-pitched and filled with distress. It wasn't a bird or a distant animal in the woods. It was something smaller, closer. A kitten? Anna's pulse quickened as she turned toward the sound. She pushed past a few bushes, her fingers brushing against rough branches, until she reached a rusty old fence at the edge of the path. And there, tangled in the cruel embrace of barbed wire, was a tiny, trembling kitten. Its fur was a mix of white and gray, though matted with dirt and specks of blood. The kitten's green eyes were wide with fear, and its little body shuddered as it let out another weak, pitiful meow. Anna's breath caught in her throat. How long had it been stuck here? Had someone abandoned it, or had it wandered too far from home? She knelt beside it, trying to move carefully so she wouldn't scare the poor creature any further. "Hey, little one," she whispered, reaching out a hand. "It's okay. I'll help you." The kitten flinched, letting out a tiny hiss, but it was too exhausted to fight. Anna's heart ached at the sight of its fragile body, its tiny paws caught in the twisted metal. She needed to free it, but how? The barbs had wrapped around its fur, digging into its skin. Every little movement could make it worse. Anna hesitated for only a moment before making a decision. She had to act. Carefully, she tried to lift one of the kitten's paws, hoping to slide it out of the wire. But as soon as she touched it, the kitten let out a sharp cry of pain. I know, I'm sorry," she murmured, blinking back tears. She couldn't just leave it here. No one else would come to help. Determined, she tried again, this time using the sleeve of her jacket to gently press down on the barbs while easing the kitten's leg free. The wire scratched against her skin, and she winced as she felt a sharp sting. Looking down, she saw a thin line of blood forming on her palm. But she didn't stop. One by one, she worked to free the kitten's trapped limbs. Each movement was slow, precise, and filled with whispered reassurances. The kitten trembled, but no longer resisted. It was too weak to fight back. Finally, with one last careful tug, the kitten slipped free from the barbed wire. Anna exhaled, only now realizing she had been holding her breath. She gathered the tiny creature in her hands, cradling it against her chest. It was so light, so fragile. The kitten's sides rose and fell in quick, shallow breaths, and its tiny body radiated heat against her own. She glanced at its wounds. Small but deep scratches marred its paws and belly. There was dried blood on its fur, but the bleeding had slowed. "You're safe now," she whispered. But as she tried to stand, a sharp pain shot through her own hands. She looked down to see fresh cuts blooming along her fingers, the sting growing stronger with every second. The wire had done more damage than she'd realized. For a moment, she considered what to do next. The kitten needed help. She needed help. There was only one option. Holding the trembling kitten close to her chest, Anna turned and started walking home. But as she neared her house, a new worry settled in her mind. What would her parents say? Would they let her keep the kitten? Would they even let her help it? And more importantly, would the kitten survive? 2. The first challenges. Anna pushed the front door open with her shoulder. The small, trembling kitten still cradled against her chest. Her hands throbbed from the scratches, but she barely noticed. The only thing that mattered was getting the kitten to safety. As soon as she stepped inside, her mother's voice called from the kitchen. "Anna? Is that you? Why are you so late?" Anna hesitated. She knew this wouldn't be easy. Holding her breath, she walked toward the warm glow of the kitchen, where her mother was slicing vegetables for dinner. The moment her mother turned around and saw what Anna was carrying, her expression shifted from concern to alarm. "Oh no, Anna. What is that?" Anna tightened her arms protectively around the kitten. "I found him outside. He was stuck in barbed wire. He's hurt, Mom. He needs help." Her mother set the knife down and took a step closer, her brow furrowed. "Honey, I know you have a good heart, but we can't just bring in stray animals like this. They could have diseases, fleas, infections. He's just a baby." Anna interrupted, her voice rising with desperation. "He'll die if I don't help him." Her father had appeared in the doorway by now, arms crossed as he took in the scene. "Anna, your mom's right. It's not safe to keep a wild animal in the house." The words felt like a slap. Wild animal? How could they not see? He wasn't just some stray. He was scared, hurt, alone. "But I can take care of him," she pleaded. "I'll clean him. I'll feed him. I'll do everything. Just let me keep him for a little while until he gets better." Her mother sighed, rubbing her temples. "Anna, you always get so attached. What happens when he's healthy? Will you be able to let him go?" Anna swallowed hard. She didn't have an answer for that. Right now, she just wanted him to survive. The kitten stirred weakly in her arms, letting out a tiny, hoarse meow. Anna looked down at him, her heart aching. "Just a few days," she whispered. "Please, Mom." Her mother exchanged a glance with her father, then let out a long sigh. "All right," she said at last, "but only for a little while. And he stays in your room." Relief flooded through Anna. "Thank you," she breathed, already turning toward the stairs. "But first," her mother added, "we need to take care of those hands of yours." Fear and pain. Anna sat at the kitchen table, biting her lip as her mother dabbed antiseptic onto her cuts. The stinging was sharp, but she didn't flinch. "You should have been more careful," her mother muttered, shaking her head. "What if the wounds get infected?" Anna stared at her hands. The scratches were deeper than she had thought, red and swollen in places. But she didn't regret it. She would do it again if she had to. "I'm fine," she murmured. "The kitten needed me." Her mother sighed. "Just promise me you'll clean your hands properly. Every day. And if it gets worse, we're going to the doctor." Anna nodded quickly. Anything to get back to the kitten. As soon as her hands were bandaged, she scooped up the tiny creature and carried him upstairs to her room. A scared little soul, she made a soft nest for him in an old shoebox, layering it with a warm towel. Carefully, she set him down inside. But the moment she let go, he scrambled to the corner of the box, pressing himself against the side. His ears flattened, and his green eyes darted around in fear. "It's okay," Anna whispered, reaching out a hand. "I won't hurt you." The kitten let out a faint hiss, curling into himself. Anna's chest tightened. He didn't trust her. Of course he didn't. He had been through so much already. She pulled her hand back and sat cross-legged beside the box, watching him. "You're safe now," she murmured. "I'll be right here." She stayed with him for hours, talking softly, making sure he knew he wasn't alone. Eventually, exhaustion pulled at her. She lay down on her bed, her heavy eyelids fluttering shut. The fever. Sometime in the night, Anna woke up shivering. Her whole body ached. Her skin felt hot and clammy, but at the same time, a deep chill ran through her bones. She swallowed, her throat dry and scratchy. Her hands throbbed, a dull, pulsing pain that she couldn't ignore. Had she caught something from the kitten? Or was it from her wounds? Dizzy and weak, she turned her head toward the shoebox. The kitten was still there, curled up in a tight ball, his tiny chest rising and falling steadily. Anna tried to sit up, but her head spun. The room felt too hot, yet her body was cold. Something was wrong. She squeezed her eyes shut, hoping the feeling would pass. But deep down, she knew it was getting worse. 3. Sickness and worry. Anna curled up under her blanket, shivering despite the warmth of her room. A dull ache pulsed through her hands, creeping up her arms like invisible fire. Her forehead was damp with sweat, yet a deep chill rattled through her bones. She clenched her jaw, trying to push through the discomfort. The pain in her hands had worsened overnight. The scratches, once just thin red lines, were now swollen and hot to the touch. Every movement sent sharp stings through her skin. She barely had the strength to sit up, but when she turned her head toward the shoebox, she saw the tiny kitten watching her. He was curled up in the corner, his small body still and quiet, but his green eyes were locked onto her, wide with something that almost looked like concern. Anna let out a weak chuckle. "You look like you're worried about me," she murmured. The kitten didn't move, didn't blink. He just sat there, as if sensing that something was wrong. She wanted to reach out, to stroke his soft fur, but even lifting her hand felt like a battle. Instead, she let her heavy eyelids close, her mind drifting between fevered dreams and brief moments of wakefulness. She wasn't sure how much time had passed when the door creaked open. "Anna?" Her mother's voice was gentle, but laced with concern. A cool hand pressed against Anna's forehead, and a sigh followed. "You're burning up, sweetheart." Anna barely managed to open her eyes. "I'm fine," she whispered, but her voice was hoarse and unconvincing. Her mother frowned, sitting on the edge of the bed. "No, you're not. Your hands." She took one of them gently, her expression darkening as she examined the inflamed scratches. "They're getting worse." Anna tried to pull away, but even that small movement made her wince. Her mother stood up. "That's it. I'm calling the doctor." The diagnosis. 30 minutes later, Anna was sitting on the couch in the living room, wrapped in a blanket while their family doctor, Dr. Reynolds, examined her hands. The kitten had been left upstairs at her room, and Anna's mind kept drifting back to him. The doctor hummed thoughtfully as he cleaned one of the deeper scratches. "Looks like a mild infection. Nothing too serious, but you'll need antibiotics." Her mother let out a breath of relief. "Will she be okay?" Dr. Reynolds nodded. "Yes, but she needs rest. Her immune system is already fighting off the fever. Let her sleep, make sure she drinks plenty of fluids, and keep an eye on those wounds. If they get worse, call me." Anna barely heard the rest of their conversation. She felt drained, her limbs heavy and weak. But even as exhaustion pulled at her, one thought kept her alert. The kitten. She glanced toward the stairs. "Can I?" She hesitated, her voice coming out softer than she intended. "Can I still take care of the kittens?" Her mother frowned, crossing her arms. "Anna, you need to rest. You can't worry about him right now." "But I promised." "You need to take care of yourself first," her father interrupted firmly. Anna clenched her jaw, frustration rising in her chest. They didn't understand. She couldn't just ignore the kitten. He had no one else. But before she could argue, another wave of dizziness washed over her, making her head spin. Maybe they were right. She was too weak to do much right now. Still, as her mother led her back upstairs to bed, she couldn't shake the uneasy feeling gnawing at her. Something didn't feel right. Where is he? Anna drifted in and out of sleep for the rest of the day, only waking when her mother brought her water or checked her temperature. She barely touched the food they gave her. Her appetite was gone. By evening, her fever had started to break, and her body felt less heavy. The pain in her hands was still there, but at least the throbbing had lessened. It was the first time she had enough energy to sit up properly. And the first thing she did was check on the kitten. She turned to the shoebox beside her bed. Empty. Anna blinked. The towel was still there, slightly rumpled, but the tiny gray and white ball of fur was gone. Her heart lurched. Where was he? 4. Searching for the missing kitten. Anna's breath caught in her throat as she stared at the empty shoebox. Maybe she was still groggy from sleep. Maybe she had just misplaced him. But no. The box was right where she had left it, and the towel was slightly crumpled, as if something small and scared had scrambled out of it. Her pulse quickened. Where could he have gone? Ignoring the stiffness in her limbs, She pushed back her blanket and swung her legs over the side of the bed. The moment her feet touched the floor, a sharp ache shot through her body. Her head felt light, and her hands still burned from the scratches, but she clenched her jaw and forced herself to stand. She had to find him. A glimpse of fear. She scanned the room, her gaze darting over every shadowed corner. The door was still closed, so he had to be here somewhere. Then, a faint rustling sound. Anna froze, holding her breath. She turned her head slowly toward the source of the noise, under the bed. She lowered herself to the floor, pressing her cheek against the wooden boards as she peered into the dim space beneath. At first, she saw nothing but dust and forgotten socks. But then, two glowing yellow eyes stared back at her. Anna's heart ached at the sight. The kitten was curled up against the wall, his tiny body tense, his ears flattened against his head. His fur bristled slightly, but he didn't hiss or try to run. He just watched her, frozen in fear. "Hey, little one," Anna whispered, stretching out her hand but stopping just short of touching him. "You got scared, huh?" The kitten didn't move. Anna exhaled slowly, keeping her voice soft. "It's okay. You don't have to be afraid." Her hands still hurt too much to reach for him abruptly, so she remained still, waiting. A gentle rescue. Minutes passed, though it felt much longer. The kitten barely moved, his sides rising and falling with quick, nervous breaths. Anna knew she had to be patient. She shifted slightly, ignoring the discomfort in her body, and spoke again. "I know you don't trust me yet, but I promise I won't hurt you." The kitten's ears twitched. That was something. Carefully, she leaned in just a little closer, inching her fingers toward his tiny body. He tensed, pressing himself further against the wall, but he didn't try to escape. Slowly, gently, she touched the soft fur of his side. He was trembling. Anna swallowed against the lump in her throat. "You're safe now," she murmured. She slid her hands underneath him, carefully lifting his fragile frame. He was so light, just a small bundle of bones and fluff. He flinched slightly, but didn't fight her. By the time she pulled him out from under the bed, he was curled up in her hands, too exhausted to resist. The first bite of trust. Anna settled back on her bed, cradling the kitten against her chest. His tiny body was still shivering, his heart racing against her fingers. "You must be hungry," she whispered. With effort, she reached for the small bowl of warm milk and softened bread she had left on her nightstand earlier. She dipped a finger into the mixture and slowly held it out to him. At first, he only sniffed it. His nose twitched, his whiskers flicking as he hesitated. Anna didn't move. Then, slowly, hesitantly, the kitten stretched his tiny neck forward and licked her fingertip. Anna felt her heart swell. Encouraged, she scooped up a small piece of the soft bread and placed it near his mouth. He sniffed again, then, to her relief, took a tiny, cautious bite. "That's it," she whispered, a small smile tugging at her lips. For the first time, the kitten wasn't shrinking away from her. He was still afraid, still unsure, but he had taken a step forward. And then he did it again. The kitten took a hesitant, shaky step toward her hand, his tiny paws pressing lightly against her skin. Anna held her breath. It was the first sign of trust. 5. Trust, step by step. The kitten licked another small bite of food from Anna's fingers, his tiny pink tongue barely grazing her skin. His body was still tense, his yellow eyes darting around nervously, but he was eating. That was something. Anna stayed perfectly still, her breath slow and even, not wanting to startle him. "You're so small," she murmured softly, watching as he took another hesitant nibble. "And so brave." The kitten's ears twitched, but he didn't pull away. He was still afraid. She could see it in the way his little paws trembled and in the way he kept flinching at the faintest sound. But he was trying. He was learning to trust her, just as she was learning how to be patient with him. The art of patience. Anna had never realized how much patience it would take to care for a frightened animal. She had imagined that once she saved him, he would curl up in her arms and understand that she was there to help. But it wasn't that simple. Every move had to be slow, every word soft. She had to give him space, to let him come to her on his own terms. So she watched. She watched the way he twitched his tail when he was unsure, the way his ears perked up at certain sounds, the way he stiffened when she reached for him too quickly. It was like learning a new language, one spoken without words. And in return, the kitten was learning, too. A familiar voice. Over the next few hours, something changed. Whenever Anna spoke, the kitten no longer shrank back as much. His ears still flicked, his body still tensed, but he didn't hide.
She talked to him about everything.
About how she found him, about how worried she had been. She told him about her favorite books, about the birds outside her window, about the silly way her mom always hummed when she cooked. She didn't know if he understood, but that wasn't the point. He was listening. And maybe, just maybe, he was starting to believe that she wasn't a threat. The first touch. Anna rested her hand on the bed beside the kitten, palm up, fingers relaxed. She let him see that she wasn't forcing anything. For a long time, he simply stared at her fingers, as if debating whether or not to run. Then, cautiously, he sniffed them. Anna held her breath. Slowly, very slowly, she lifted her fingers just a little and brushed them against the soft fur of his back. The kitten froze. His tiny muscles locked up, his breath quickened, but he didn't bolt. He didn't hiss or swipe at her. He just stood there, still and uncertain. Anna's heart pounded in her chest. "It's okay," she whispered, pulling her hand back just as gently as she had reached out. She didn't want to rush him. She had to let him decide. The kitten blinked at her, his tail flicking once, then twice. And then, to her surprise, he stayed. He didn't run. He didn't hide. He simply curled up on the bed beside her, still wary, but no longer desperate to escape. A tiny victory, falling back into fever. Anna smiled, feeling warmth spread through her chest. But a moment later, another kind of warmth spread through her body, one that wasn't comforting at all. A sudden wave of dizziness washed over her. Her limbs felt heavy, her head light. She blinked rapidly, trying to clear the fog in her mind. Her hands ached. The scratches were pulsing again, hot and sore. She swallowed against the dryness in her throat, but it didn't help.
No, not now.
She wanted to stay awake, to keep watching over the kitten. But her strength was fading. She barely managed to lay her head back down before darkness pulled her under. Carrying through pain, Anna drifted in and out of sleep, her fever pulling her into strange dreams and restless darkness. Sometimes, she thought she heard voices, her mother's worried tone, the deep murmur of her father, the distant hum of the television downstairs. Other times, she thought she felt something soft and warm brushing against her hand, but she was too weak to tell if it was real or just a dream. She barely noticed when her mother came in to check her temperature or when a cool cloth was pressed to her forehead. The world felt distant, muffled, like she was floating just beneath the surface of wakefulness. But even in her fevered state, one thought kept lingering at the edges of her mind. The kitten. A kitten without his caregiver. Her parents did their best to care for him. Anna could hear her mother's voice murmuring as she placed fresh milk near his box. She could hear the soft clatter of a small dish being set on the floor. But something wasn't right. Even in her fevered haze, she knew. The kitten wasn't eating as much. He wasn't mewing, wasn't exploring. He was waiting for her. She wanted to call out to him, to let him know she was still there. But her voice was weak, and her body felt like it was weighed down with heavy stones. So instead, she simply let sleep take her again. A midnight visitor. The room was dark when Anna next stirred. The air felt cool against her skin, and for the first time in days, her body didn't ache quite as much. She blinked groggily, trying to make sense of the faint rustling sound near her bed. It was soft, barely noticeable, but it was there. Something small moving carefully, hesitantly. Then warmth. Something light and fragile pressed against her side. Tiny paws shifted on the blanket, and a hesitant weight settled near her shoulder. Anna's heart skipped a beat. She turned her head slowly, her breath catching in her throat. The kitten. He had climbed into her bed. His small, thin body curled up beside her, his head resting just inches from her arm. He was still cautious, still uncertain, but he was there. He had come to her. Whispers in the night. Anna swallowed past the lump in her throat. Carefully, so carefully, she lifted a hand and let her fingers rest lightly against his fur. He didn't flinch this time. Instead, he stayed still, letting her touch him. A warm, grateful feeling spread through her chest. "Hey, little one," she whispered, her voice hoarse from sleep. The kitten let out a tiny breath, almost like a sigh. Slowly, his small body relaxed against hers, and then
A sound.
soft, barely audible at first. A gentle, hesitant vibration beneath her fingertips. A purr. Anna's lips parted in surprise. It was quiet, fragile, as if he wasn't quite sure how to do it yet. But it was real. He trusted her. A tear slipped down Anna's cheek, though she wasn't sure if it was from exhaustion or something deeper. "You're safe now," she whispered. "I promise." The kitten didn't move, didn't hide. He simply stayed beside her, his tiny warmth a comfort in the cool night air. And for the first time in days, Anna slept peacefully. A new morning. When morning came, Anna awoke to golden sunlight streaming through her window. The kitten was still beside her, his small body rising and falling with steady breaths. But something else was different. The heavy ache in her body was gone. The fever, the dizziness, the awful weight that had been pressing down on her chest for days had lifted. She wasn't fully better yet, but she could feel it. She was healing. And as she looked down at the tiny creature curled up beside her, she realized something else. They were healing together. First steps to recovery. Sunlight poured through the curtains, filling the room with soft morning light. Anna stretched, feeling the lingering soreness in her limbs, but noticing something new. Her body felt lighter. The feverish fog in her mind had lifted. She turned her head and saw the small gray kitten still curled up beside her, his tiny body rising and falling with gentle breaths. A warmth spread through her chest. She was getting better. And now, she could finally take care of him the way he deserved, caring for the little one. With newfound energy, Anna carefully sat up, trying not to disturb the kitten. But as soon as she moved, his yellow eyes blinked open, and he lifted his head sleepily. "Good morning," she murmured, smiling. He watched her for a moment before giving the tiniest stretch, his front paws reaching forward as his back arched. Then, to her delight, he let out a small, squeaky meow. Anna giggled. "I bet you're hungry." She gently picked him up and carried him to the small dish of warm milk and softened bread her mother had left for him. This time, he didn't hesitate. He sniffed the food, then eagerly began lapping up the milk, his tiny pink tongue moving quickly. As he ate, Anna grabbed a soft cloth and dipped it into a bowl of warm water. His little paws were still covered in dried dirt, and she wanted to clean them properly. "Okay, let's get you all freshened up," she said gently. She expected him to resist, but to her surprise, he only twitched slightly when she wiped his paws. "You're getting used to me, huh?" she whispered, her heart swelling. A playful spirit awakens. That afternoon, something magical happened. Anna had been resting on her bed, watching the kitten as he explored the room. He had started wandering farther from his box, his small paws padding curiously across the floor. And then, out of nowhere, he pounced. Anna blinked, surprised. The kitten had leaped onto a loose thread hanging from her blanket, batting at it with tiny paws, his eyes wide and focused. A laugh bubbled up in her chest. "You want to play?" she asked, her voice light with amusement. She reached for a piece of string and wiggled it gently in front of him. The kitten's ears perked up.
His tail twitched.
And then, he pounced again, this time with more confidence. Anna grinned. For the first time since she had found him, the kitten wasn't just surviving. He was playing. A name of his own. That night, as the kitten curled up beside her again, Anna ran her fingers gently over his soft fur. "You're not just some scared little thing anymore," she whispered. "You're clever and sweet and—" She paused, watching the way his gray fur rippled as he stretched. It was soft, like a tiny cloud. A thought struck her. "Tuchka," she murmured. Like a little storm cloud. The kitten blinked up at her, his yellow eyes round and curious. Tuchka, she repeated, smiling. Do you like it? He let out the smallest purr, pressing his head against her arm. Anna's heart swelled. Yeah, she whispered. Tuchka, it is. An empty morning. The next day, Anna woke up feeling lighter, stronger. She sat up and stretched, ready to greet her little companion. But something was wrong. The space beside her pillow was empty. Frowning, she glanced around the room. Tuchka, she called softly. Silence. Her chest tightened. She looked toward his food dish. Untouched. A nervous feeling crept up her spine. Where was he? A dangerous disappearance. Morning light filled the room, casting golden patterns on the walls. Anna stretched, rubbing the last traces of sleep from her eyes. A warm feeling lingered in her chest, the comfort of waking up knowing that Tuchka was safe, that he trusted her now. She reached out to stroke his soft fur, but her fingers met nothing but the cool fabric of her blanket. Anna's eyes snapped open. The little nest beside her pillow was empty. Frowning, she sat up and scanned the room. The small food dish in the corner sat untouched. The soft blanket where he usually curled up was still neatly folded. A strange unease settled in her stomach. Tuchka, she called softly. No answer. Her heart beat a little faster. She glanced under the bed, inside the box he had claimed as his hiding place. Nothing. She tried again, louder this time. Tuchka? Silence. The search begins. Anna scrambled to her feet, ignoring the slight dizziness that still lingered from her illness. She checked behind the curtains, under her desk, even inside her open dresser drawers. Nothing. Her breath caught in her throat. What if he had somehow slipped out of her room? She hurried into the hallway, her socks barely making a sound against the wooden floor. Mama. Papa, she called. Have you seen Tuchka? Her mother poked her head out of the kitchen, a dish towel in hand.
No, sweetheart.
Isn't he in your room? He's gone. Anna's voice wavered. I can't find him anywhere. Her father looked up from his newspaper. Check the living room. He might have found a new hiding spot. Anna nodded quickly, but a terrible thought was already forming in her mind. What if he wasn't just hiding? What if he had somehow gotten outside? Running out of time. The moment the thought hit her, she bolted toward the front door. She yanked it open, stepping onto the porch, the crisp morning air wrapping around her like a warning. Her eyes darted across the yard, scanning every bush, every shadow. What if he got lost? What if he was scared and alone? Panic surged through her veins. Tuchka, she called desperately. Tuchka, where are you? No answer. Not even a rustle. Her breath came faster, her chest tightening. Then suddenly,
A sound. Faint.
muffled. A tiny, barely audible squeak. Anna froze. It wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from inside the house. A muffled cry. Heart pounding, she turned back inside, listening carefully. Another sound, this time a weak, high-pitched mewl. She followed it, her feet moving faster than her thoughts. Past the kitchen, past the dining room, until she stood in front of the storage closet near the back of the house. Her fingers trembled as she reached for the handle. She took a breath, then slowly pushed the door open. And there, in the dim light of the small, cluttered space, she saw him, Tuchka, huddled in the corner, his tiny body trembling, his yellow eyes wide with fear. Anna's breath hitched. How had he gotten in here? And more importantly, why wasn't he moving? The final test. Anna's heart was racing as she knelt before the cluttered closet. Her eyes locked on Tuchka, still trembling in the corner, his tiny body wedged between stacks of old boxes and forgotten items. His fur was ruffled, his eyes wide and fearful. He had been trying to climb up to the shelf, perhaps looking for a quiet space to hide, but had gotten stuck halfway. His little legs struggled to find purchase, his claws scratching against the wooden shelves. Hey, little one, Anna whispered, her voice soothing but urgent. She crouched lower, her hands trembling as she reached for him. It's okay. You're safe. Tuchka mewed softly, his head jerking toward her, but he didn't try to move. He was stuck, his tiny form lodged between the shelves and the boxes, unable to free himself. Anna took a deep breath. Gently, she slid her hands under his belly and carefully lifted him, inch by inch, guiding him through the narrow gap. "Come on, Tuchka," she coaxed, her voice warm and steady. "You're almost out." Finally, with a small, relieved meow, he was free. His tiny body nestled into her arms as she pulled him close, cradling him against her chest. "Good boy," she murmured, brushing his fur with her fingers. "You did it." She held him for a long moment, savoring the warmth of his tiny form against her. A friendship blossoms. In that moment, as she sat on the floor of the small storage closet, Anna realized something. She had always known she was helping Tuchka, feeding him, cleaning his wounds, keeping him safe. But now, with him curled up in her arms, purring softly against her, she understood. She wasn't just taking care of a stray kitten anymore. He had become her friend. The bond between them had deepened, stronger than anything she had expected. It was more than a feeling of responsibility. It was a connection, a quiet understanding that they were in this together. She smiled softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You're not alone anymore, Tuchka. And neither am I." A growing bond. Her parents had watched this transformation closely, noticing the way Anna cared for the kitten with such tenderness. Her mother often caught her talking to him, even singing him soft lullabies, as if he could understand every word. "I think he's become part of the family, hasn't he?" her father said one evening, glancing over at the two of them, sitting together on the couch. Anna smiled at the thought. "He's not just part of the family," she said softly. "He's my family." Her mother chuckled, brushing her hands together as she set down the dishes. "It's clear you two are inseparable." Anna looked at the little gray kitten, now happily curled up in her lap. He was sleeping soundly, a peaceful expression on his tiny face. "I guess we are," she whispered, her fingers gently stroking his soft fur. A new family member. Later that evening, as Anna and Tuchka played together in the living room, her mother smiled from the kitchen. "I think we need to talk," she said, glancing over at Anna. Anna looked up from where she was sitting, a puzzled expression crossing her face. "What about?" Her mother wiped her hands on a dish towel and walked over to where Anna sat with Tuchka. "Well," she said with a grin, "it seems like we have a new member of the family." Anna's eyes widened in surprise. "You mean?" Her mother nodded, her smile softening. "Yes, Anna. We're keeping him. He's yours. He's part of our family now." Anna's heart leapt. She looked down at Tuchka, who was now purring contentedly in her lap, as if he understood the momentousness of what was happening. Tears welled up in Anna's eyes as she whispered, "Thank you." Her mother leaned down, placing a gentle kiss on the top of Anna's head. "You've earned it, sweetheart." The final twist. As Anna hugged the kitten close, she felt an overwhelming sense of joy and gratitude. But as she looked up at her mother, something about her smile caught Anna's attention. Her mother's eyes were twinkling with a secret. "I've been thinking," she said, "maybe we should give Tuchka a proper home." Anna tilted her head, confused. "What do you mean?" Her mother's smile widened. "Maybe we should adopt a little friend for him, so he's never lonely." Anna blinked, her eyes widening in surprise. "Another kitten?" Her mother winked. "Why not? It seems like Tuchka has a lot of love to give." Anna's heart skipped a beat as she realized that the family they were building around her, around Tuchka, wasn't just about a kitten anymore. It was about love, connection, and the joy of opening her heart to something new. A new home, a new life. The days had passed, each one bringing Anna and Tuchka closer. The wounds that had once marred his tiny body had healed, and his fur, once matted and stiff with fear, now shone in the sunlight. It was soft and silky, like the fur of a well-loved kitten who had finally found his place in the world. He had become the picture of health, his eyes brighter, his body stronger. Anna spent every day caring for him, brushing his coat, playing with him, making sure he had everything he needed. Their routine had become second nature, a part of her life that felt as essential as the air she breathed. The bond between them had grown so deep that it was hard to imagine life without him. Tuchka was no longer the scared, injured kitten she had found in the old closet. He was her friend, her companion. He followed her everywhere, curling up at her feet when she read or playing with her whenever she had time. He had even started to sleep on her pillow, just beside her head, a constant reminder that love and trust could grow even in the most unexpected places. Reflections on that fateful day. But as Anna watched Tuchka play with his favorite toy, she couldn't help but think back to that day. The day she had found him in the tangled mess of barbed wire. That cold, lonely afternoon when he had been so small, so fragile, and so terrified. Her mind wandered to the fear she had felt when she first saw his tiny body, shaking and covered in cuts, trapped in the cruel embrace of the wire. What would have happened if she hadn't found him? What would have happened if she hadn't been there to help? The thought was a sharp reminder of how fragile life could be, how easily things could change. She might not have been able to save him, and he might have never known love, never known what it felt like to be safe. But she had found him, and she had saved him. And together, they had made it through, a heart full of understanding. In those quiet moments, as she sat by the window, watching the world go by, Anna realized something deep within her heart. She hadn't just helped Tuchka, she had helped herself. The act of caring for him had shown her the true meaning of kindness. She had learned that the smallest gestures, the smallest acts of love, could change the world in ways you might never expect. She had learned the importance of patience, responsibility, and above all, trust. Trust not only in others, but in herself. And most importantly, she had learned that sometimes the smallest creatures needed the biggest hearts. A life together, a future ahead. The sun was beginning to set, casting a warm glow through the window. Anna and Tuchka were sitting together on the windowsill, enjoying the peace of the moment. The world outside seemed so big, so full of possibilities, but in this little room, in this small corner of the world, everything felt perfect. Tuchka lay in her lap, purring softly as she gently scratched behind his ears. His little body was warm against hers, and for a moment, it felt like time had stopped. Anna smiled to herself, her fingers tracing the soft lines of his fur. She knew that their journey together was only just beginning. There would be challenges ahead, of course. Life wasn't always smooth, but she felt ready for anything as long as Tuchka was by her side. Together, they had created a new life, a new home full of love, warmth, and friendship. They had found each other in the most unlikely of places, and now, nothing would ever separate them. Anna looked down at her furry friend, who gazed up at her with trusting eyes. She whispered softly, "You're my best friend, Tuchka. I'll always take care of you." And, as if he understood, he purred louder, curling up contentedly in her arms. They sat there, in the quiet warmth of the afternoon sun, knowing that they had a friend for life.